From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. The Sao Paulo Forum in Havana wrapped up on Tuesday evening with a closing ceremony. This forum focused on ways to strengthen unity and integration across Latin America and the Caribbean. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro promised to continue the fight against constant attacks led by the United States. Other leaders also spoke on the importance of UNASUR and other institutions founded under Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez. The Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel voiced support for the struggles of the developing world across the globe and remarked on the need to ramp up efforts to counter the wave of misinformation spread against countries which are implementing socialist policies.
We need to learn to employ better the means of technology to prevent the lies only inhabiting the internet. We have to confront our adversaries who have been skillful in lying, distorting and silencing the revolutionary work of Latin America.
Leaders from beyond the region also joined the three-day event. Representatives from the Communist Party of China, the Communist Party of Vietnam, and the Popular Revolutionary Party of Laos spoke at Tuesday's closing events. From the Caribbean, former Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis, Denzel Douglas, was among those who took the opportunity to praise late Cuban leader Fidel Castro and revolutionary Cuba for its important work in the Caribbean.
Cuba continues to be a true friend of the Caribbean region, which is important now more than ever, when the world's biggest superpower has withdrawn from its own commitments in this particular region. For these reasons, I add my voice to the call for an end to the unjust financial and economic embargo against Cuba and to publicly condemn.
Two more social leaders were killed in Colombia in the last 24 hours. Teacher Juan de Jesus Moreno was shot in front of his students in the southern municipality of Curillo. And Ives Trujillo, an activist from Agua Blanca in Cauca, was found dead on Wednesday. The human rights defender was kidnapped on July 10. At least 311 social leaders have been killed in Colombia since 2016. And journalists in Colombia are also threatened, mainly after reporting on corruption. More than 100 have reported receiving serious threats. Press freedom organizations are demanding action from the government.
Pedro Baca, director of the Organization for Freedom of Press, has rejected the threats against journalists in Colombia. The organization has been sounding alerts on the increase of threats against journalists. As of this year, 93 threats have been received.
The Organization for Freedom of Press issued an alert last week over the considerable number of threats against journalists throughout the region. We know that journalists are the most vulnerable, and we believe that the government's answer is insufficient.
The most visible accusations have been from Maria Jimena Duzan and Yolanda Ruiz on their Twitter accounts. The journalists who work in the regions of Colombia are the ones who are receiving the most threats, especially for the reports against corruption and illegal mining.
What are the integral guarantees of being able to express themselves freely? Without that, implies a threat of retaliation.
The Minister of Interior announced that the government is already taking measures to demand safety for journalists.
We are not going to allow that in Colombia. The freedom of speech and the freedom of public opinion turns into an excuse to threaten and kill people.
All this is taking place in the midst of threats against social leaders that, in spite of the precautionary measures from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, have not received any guarantees from the national government.
After we denounced the threats against us, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights has recently decided to grant preventive measures on our behalf.
Social organizations have rejected all threats against journalists and of those leaders who are defending the construction of peace in Colombia.
The 33 members of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, or CELAC, confirmed Bolivia will become the pro-tempore chair of the organization in 2019. The decision was made at the bloc's meeting with the European Union. The meeting concluded with the approval of a joint declaration to strengthen multilateralism, cooperation, and the ways to apply the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. The two-day summit discussed promoting fair trade and quality employment for all, among other issues. Our correspondent Freddy Morales has more details in this report.
La Cancillería boliviana confirmó que
the Bolivian Foreign Minister Fernando Guanacuni has confirmed that the country will take over the temporary chairmanship of CELAC next year, an organization formed by 33 countries from Latin America and the Caribbean. The unanimous decision was made during the second meeting that CELAC. At that meeting, Guanacuni proposed Bolivia as host for the next CELAC Heads of State Summit next year. The two organizations discussed climate change, the global policy on drugs, a global pact on migration, sustainable development, and cooperation on digital and urban development. CELAC and the EU bring together 61 countries, a third of the members of the United Nations.
That was Freddy Morales from Bolivia. Protests are planned in Brazil this Wednesday to mark the 100 days spent in prison by the former president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. His supporters have launched an online campaign to highlight the injustice of his imprisonment. They are also linking his case to the 100th birthday of the South African leader Nelson Mandela. Let's hear from Mia Alberti.
100 Days of Injustice is the hashtag trending on Brazilian Twitter today, as thousands share their support for former President Lula da Silva, in jail for over 3 months now. The hashtag is part of a new campaign by the Workers' Party to demand Lula's release, just a month before the deadline for the official candidate registration for the upcoming election.
100 days of Lula in jail. 100 days of an injustice. Where is the proof? What crime did Lula commit?
A never-before-seen statement from Lula da Silva was also released. In the video, filmed just minutes before his arrest, the former president reiterates his innocence and demands his case be reviewed.
I want them to judge the validity of this case, the validity of the accusations against me, so they can find out if I committed a crime or not. Then they could arrest me, and I respect that decision.
In this clip, Lula also rails against the Brazilian judiciary, accusing them of mixing politics with justice.
If these people want to do politics, they better leave their position as representatives of the state, as public workers, and enlist in a party, run for office, and then do politics.
The Workers' Party say Lula will run for the presidency, but the Brazilian justice system is divided over the legal possibility of his release. Lawyer Luiz Felipe Panelli says the chances of getting the former president out of jail are slim.
It will be very hard for Lula to run for office because he was convicted in second instance. There is still an appeal in the Supreme Federal Court and in the Supreme Court of Justice, but the electoral law is very clear. After a second instance conviction, a defendant cannot run for president.
Panelli says Lula's best shot is a change in the Supreme Federal Court, where the leftist leader's case is up for review.
The president of the Supreme Federal Court, Carmen Lucia, says she won't review Lula's case, but she is leaving, and the next president should be Minister Diaz Toffoli, a historic ally of the Workers' Party, who already opposed jail in cases of second instance.
Lula is serving a 12-year jail sentence in Curitiba Federal Prison, and even if he's barred from running, his influence might still lead his party to victory.
The world is celebrating the 100th anniversary of the birth of Nelson Mandela, who became a symbol against racism and inequality. that transcended South African borders. Mandela died in 2013, and his fight against South Africa's apartheid system became a model for people across the world. Jailed for 27 years, he became the first black president in South Africa in 1994. Different acts of homage are taking place across South Africa. The Elders, a group of leaders founded by Mandela, planted 100 trees representing 100 sparks of hope in Johannesburg.
Than who we've been before.
We'll take a short break now, but join us again after a video from our multimedia team.
Diría Bolívar, si le contaran o si estuviera viendo lo que somos hoy, ¿qué diría Martí si pudiera ver todo lo que estamos viendo nosotros en esta América que él soñó unida algún día? ¿Qué menos podemos hacer nosotros y qué menos puede hacer la izquierda de América Latina que crear una conciencia en favor de la unidad? Eso debiera estar inscrito en las banderas de la izquierda.
Welcome back. Mexican President-elect Andrés Manuel López Obrador is open to explore the possible legalization of drugs in an attempt to curb violent crime. Former Supreme Court Judge Olga Sánchez Cordero said that López Obrador is open to debate on this issue and to do whatever is necessary to restore peace in the country. Sánchez Cordero said the new government has to find new ways to address brutal violence fueled by drug cartels. López Obrador also said she will be named Interior Minister during his administration. Reforming education, stopping privatization, and ending corruption are just some of the things that Mexican President-elect López Obrador has promised to deliver as he takes office in December.
The first plan of action by Andrés Manuel López Obrador is to revert the decree on water reserves that many consider to be privatization. This is just one of the 12 reforms that he considers fundamental for his administration to pass through the legislature. Although there is support for these measures, the numbers required to pass laws are still lacking.
All these possible decisions bring an interesting scenario of absolute majorities. Nonetheless, we'll need to have 2/3 of the total number of votes to start these constitutional reforms.
Another promised reform is developing consultative referendums to increase democratic participation and dialogue with the opposition. This has to take place before the new president even takes office in order to pave the way for change.
Morena's Andrés Manuel López Obrador is forced to redefine or reconfigure political parties.
Civil organizations have started analyzing the proportions of fighting corruption, which is another priority. Experts say Mexico needs more than strict penalties for corrupt officials to put an end to this deep-rooted practice in public administration.
No constitutional mechanisms are being created to guarantee that honesty will prevail and to enforce an environment of transparency and responsibility.
After decades of damage caused by neoliberalism, historian Lorenzo Meyer thinks it will be very difficult to solve the problems affecting Mexican society in only 6 years. He thinks not all of the proposals will be fulfilled.
No one will be fully satisfied, but the point is not to leave a single person fully excluded or unsatisfied or feeling the system is against him or her.
Apart from these 12 legislative reforms, there is also a 50-point plan on austerity and the fight against corruption, which López Obrador has started defining.
At least 13 people were killed in Mexico after a dispute between two groups over a land in the southern state of Oaxaca. According to Oaxaca's Attorney General's office, the deadly gun attack took place when members of one communal land association were attacked by members of a neighboring group after entering into a disputed zone. The victims belonged to the community of Santa Maria Ecatepec. They were shot by members of the community of San Lucas Ixcotepec. The two communities have been fighting over a 3,600-hectare patch of land since 1976. Ecuador's government continues to look into investments, but meanwhile, the National Statistics and Census Institute has published a report showing that extreme poverty has increased.
Top authorities of Ecuador and Euro-Asian Economic Commission have met in Quito, according with an economic cooperation where they have discussed ways to strengthen commercial ties between Ecuador and the countries members of the Commission. The foreign minister said 97 national products are exported from Ecuador, as banana, coffee, flowers, and among others. For the foreign ministry, Ecuador is going in the right direction.
In 2017, Ecuador exported $872 million and imported $160 million, meaning that our trade balance was positive, with a surplus of $712 million, and the most important thing, 610 companies are already exporting.
Meanwhile, on a statement published by the Ecuador's National Statistics and Census Institute, stressed extreme poverty increase, mainly in Guayaquil, which represents the city with the highest poverty rates with 14.1%. Also, between the 2017 and 2018, Quito showed high poverty rates. The INEC revealed poverty increased to 12.8% from 7.8%.
We can expect an increase in poverty. We can expect to see the employment figures decrease. If we continue to aim at decreasing public spending and also decrease the possibility of being able to finance the state through taxes.
Several Ecuadorian social organizations also expressed their concern about the rights of the workers. They highlighted the economic measures taken by the president just benefit to big companies.
What is happening after a decade shows the weakening of the economy, a change of public policies that before companies no longer can.
The government's message has been loud and clear to open new economic agreements after the visit of the Vice President of the United States to Ecuador. The government will continue to look for investment, also will try to be part of the Pacific Alliance in the coming days. Denise Herrera, Telesur Quito, Ecuador.
Judges involved in the latest corruption scandal in Peru will be investigated, as announced by President Martín Vizcarra. Vizcarra called Congress for an extraordinary meeting on Friday after several leaked audios linked judges to the sale of sentences and abuse of power. This is President Vizcarra's new attempt to show his willingness to fight corruption.
I have decided to summon the Congress urgently for an extraordinary session on Friday so that we can debate on the removal of the members of the National Council of the Judiciary.
Still in Peru, more than 50 people have been arrested as part of an anti-drug operation. The operation took place in the isolated jungle region of Putumayo in the border with Colombia, in the first week after a 60-day state of emergency in the province was declared. More than 350 members of the Peruvian security forces used 5 helicopters, 3 planes and 2 boats in a joint operation with their Colombian counterparts in the area. Peruvian President Martín Vizcarra visited the area and said the country is determined to protect its territory. The fight of Honduran murder activist Berta Cáceres bore fruit as the hydroelectric project Agua Zarca was suspended. The corporation in charge of the project confirmed the construction of the hydroelectric plant in the indigenous territory of Lenca people east of the country. Cáceres' family said this is a triumph not only for Berta, but also for the community. Berta Cáceres was killed in March 2016 after leading the fight against the hydroelectric plant. She became a symbol of the fight of indigenous women against environment-damaging projects. 1 year after Uruguay legalized the sale of marijuana in pharmacies, citizens and pharmacists say the measure has been a success. Cannabis consumers say that one positive aspect is that they no longer have to contact an illegal dealer, and so now the quality of the product is ensured. 4.5 years ago, Uruguay, a country of just 3.4 million people, became a global pioneer by decriminalizing and regulating the recreational use of marijuana. Sales at pharmacies began 1 year ago, and Uruguayans can buy up to 40 grams per month. Severe rain has affected several areas in Costa Rica, some of which are on high alert due to the risk of flooding. Our correspondent Fernando Francia has the story.
Costa Rica is
going through its 16th tropical wave and entering in number 17. Rain continues in the Caribbean side of the country, which received a month's average rainfall this last weekend alone. This has generated floods in the province of Limón, where the red alert continues. Authorities continue to be on alert in order to prevent any catastrophes. The president has traveled to the affected zone and has said resources will be assigned to respond to the emergencies.
That was Fernando Francia from Costa Rica. We'll take another short break, but join us after another video from our multimedia team. Thanks for joining us again. Tension continues in Gaza as the Israeli military continue with its strikes and blockade against the Strip. The latest attack severely damaged a facility for children with cerebral palsy, according to the executive director of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, Raquel Martí. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited the base of the Israeli Army's Gaza division, where he showed his support for the military and said the attacks would continue. A suicide bomber in Afghanistan has killed at least 20 people. Here's more on that and other stories making headlines around the world.
A suicide bomber in northern Afghanistan has killed at least 20 people, including a Taliban commander, in the province of Sare Pul. And in a separate incident in southern Afghanistan, Taliban attacked a police checkpost, killing at least 9 policemen, according to officials. The attacks follows government reports of fighting between Islamic State and Taliban militants in recent days. The United Nations last week said the civilian deaths in the country has reached a record high. Ethiopia has resumed commercial flights to Eritrea after a gap of 20 years. Relations between the two former warring neighbors have significantly improved in recent months after Ethiopia's new reformist Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed announced in June to accept a 2002 United Nations-backed border demarcation, paving the way for peace between the two nations.
But this day marks a unique event in the history of Ethiopia and Eritrea. For the last 20 years, border was closed, no flight connection, and no connectivity at all. We have paid enough price, more than enough price.
9 out of 11 critically endangered black rhinos in Kenya have died after being transferred from the Kenyan capital Nairobi to a wildlife park, according to the Ministry of Tourism. They were moved last month, and salt poisoning is being suspected as the cause of the deaths, as the rhinos could not adapt to the park's salt water.
A trade agreement between the European Union and Morocco has provoked an angry response from representatives of the occupied Western Sahara. The Polisario Front, the Western Saharan government in exile, condemned the agreement, arguing that it goes against a ruling by the European Court of Justice, which said the Western Sahara should not be included in any agreement with Morocco because the kingdom has no legal sovereignty over the territory. The Western Sahara was occupied by Morocco in 1975. And with that, we come to the end of this news brief. But there's another stories, as you know, you can find on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And be sure to also follow us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.